Racist Paladin goes psycho over interracial assassin and cleric romance. Okay, so this happened a few years back when I was getting back into tabletops and the like. It was my third campaign I've played and houses one of my favorite characters I've made. Kex, a lizard folk assassin with an emphasis on using the lizard folk ability to make certain weapons out of bone, as well as the stereotypical literal and practical way that lizard folk tend to think. Unfortunately, this character would almost cause me to give up D&D. The group in question consisted of the DM, Kex, Kyra, a female human storm herald barbarian, Zephyr, an elven wind magic sorceress whose gender tended to depend on a dice roll. DM and Zephyr's player came up with this idea for add wild magic shenanigans. Lycoris, a halfling life cleric with an aversion to blood and macabre things, and the main event, Arkham Moonheaven, male paladin of devotion who had a brother-sister relationship with Lycoris. Things began simply enough. Characters meet for a job which was protecting a caravan. Characters are wary of the lizard folk, which I didn't mind, as I like to play the more unusual races. Characters slaughter bandits. But when the looting starts, well, that's when things get interesting. I helped loot the bandits for weapons, gold, and the like, but before we leave I look at the DM with a calm and almost lack of emotion type look, to keep in theme with being a lizard folk, and tell him I'd like to harvest their bones. This floored a lot of the other players because it was kind of out of left field. The DM knew about lizard folk, but the others with the exception of the hilarious Lycoris' player did not. So upon the DM explaining that as a lizard folk I knew how to harvest bones from small and medium creatures, and could make weapons out of them, that Kyra and Zephyr calmed down. Arkham didn't. In fact, he began to preach about how Kex was showing his true monstrous nature, but everyone ignored him and moved on. That night, Kex began his crafting right in front of everyone. I had made sure the other players were cool with this and they all agreed. Being squeamish, Lycoris roleplayed that they were uncomfortable with the activity, but Kex talked to her in order for her to slowly become more comfortable with the activity. Again, Arkham began to preach that Kex was a monster, and even threw in that he was evil because he was an assassin. Again, we waved it off as Arkham just being protective of Lycoris. However, no one expected how out of hand that it would eventually become. As we went deeper into the campaign, Kex's bone collecting became so regular that Kyra would help, while Zephyr would come up with ways to use spells to make it easier. Arkham even began to preach less, and Lycoris even began to view Kex as a friend. I even had Kex carve a holy symbol for Lycoris as a friendship offering, out of the bones of a hobgoblin warlord she had defeated. This was the first true strike in Arkham's eyes. Arkham pulled Kex aside and warned him that he was getting too close to Lycoris, and even tried to frame it that because they were getting closer, it endangered Lycoris. I knew that the reason he presented wasn't the real reason, and so did the DM, who asked that we roll to see what happens, and I barely lost. After that, Kex was cordial with everyone but never got too close. The second strike came when Lycoris was kidnapped because her player was sick that week. The kidnappers were a cult that Arkham's order had attempted to eradicate and failed. When Arkham explained the backstory, Kex simply asked if that meant the kidnapping was his fault, which caused Arkham to grow hostile at Kex, so Kyra kindly asked Kex to give Arkham some space. Arkham then tried to persuade Zephyr and Kyra to use Kex as bait, so that Arkham could save Lycoris. However, Kyra signed that she'd be the superior bait, and Kex would be the obvious choice to sneak in. Arkham tried to explain that as a lizard folk, a monster, Kex was expendable, but both Kyra and Zephyr actually liked Kex. Yes, the literal and practical mentality caused friction in the group sometimes, but we got along in the end due to Kex being curious about Kyra and her tribe, and Zephyr's chaotic existence. Eventually, Arkham caved to the plan of Kyra being a distraction, and Kex saving Lycoris, causing the second strike. Jump ahead to the group being level 12, and us fighting against one of the big bad's officers and his army of hobgoblin mages. Everyone's doing their best to fight when Kex notices a few enemies going for Lycoris, after noticing she's the healer. Kex dashes to protect her back, eventually falling from a pincer attack involving a few enemy rogues killing him. When combat finished, Arkham told the group to leave Kex, stating that's what he'd want, and I couldn't argue as technically that was correct, especially with the DM being a fan of the idea that resurrection can fail. Lycoris glared at Arkham before pulling out a diamond to revive Kex. She whispered something to his dead body as she passed the DC to revive. For a few sessions, Lycoris avoids Kex and Arkham before Kex grabbed her and held her in place, desperate to learn what the problem was. Lycoris admitted that she was in love with Kex, and after a few moments, Kex admitted to feeling a closeness to Lycoris. My way of having a lizard folk admit they love someone. Kyra cheered, and Zephyr offered to buy them drinks for getting together. Arkham noted the final strike and waited. The next time the group made camp, Kex offered to hunt for food, and Arkham offered to assist. The moment the two were alone, Arkham attacked with his greatsword but missed. Kex asked why he attacked, and Arkham yelled that he was looking at a monster who had corrupted his sister and needed to free her from his monstrous magic. The DM asked Arkham's player if he was sure he wanted to go through with this path. Yes, Arkham's player replied. After all, he's a monster, and as a paladin, I kill monsters. I rolled my eyes as Kex drew his rapier, which was in fact an ice brand we had taken from a dragon horde. The battle was intense, with Arkham swinging around his greatsword like a barbarian, and Kex using any trick he could to get an advantage. Eventually, the rest of the party showed up, and Arkham tried to explain to them that it was all Kex's fault, that Kex was the aggressor. The DM asked him to roll a persuasion check, and I was afraid. Arkham had a really good charisma score, so his persuasion was pretty good. The RNG goddess was merciful and everyone beat his roll, and called Arkham out on his racism, finally done with it. The battle continued until Arkham rolled a nat 1. Whenever we rolled a nat 1 on an attack, our DM rolled on a table to determine what happened. Arkham overextended himself and fell prone. Kex attacked the downed paladin. Knowing I'd get in sneak attack damage, I roll my d20 in hopes of hitting. Nat 20. Kex's strike is so precious and vicious that he freezes Arkham's heart solid, giving him a slow and painful death. Lycoris walked over, holding a diamond as if she was going to revive Arkham, before he watched her put it away and kiss Kex. My brother died the moment he drew his sword on the person I love, Lycoris said. This session ended and the DM asked Arkham's player to make a new character by the next session. The next session came and the player had created a human Pact of the Blade Celestial Warlock, who immediately tried to kill Kex. When the player was asked why he kept attacking Kex, he just spouted off some speech about how monster races being playable was stupid, as no one wanted to party with them, and that I was a terrible player for playing one. The DM was livid and booted the player from the group. I left soon after because my confidence was shot by his words, but I was eventually convinced to keep playing by the group who actually liked the fact that I played the more interesting races. I'm thankful to that group and have even named a few other monster race characters after them. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, All Things D&D. Stay tuned for more amazing Dungeons & Dragons content.